She was appointed as an independent expert to the Constitutional Council of Sri Lanka in 2023. May I now warmly invite Professor Dinesha Samaratne to present the formal introduction of the keynote speaker.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor to be called upon to introduce our next keynote speaker, the second keynote speaker for the day, Dr. Sasanka Pereira, who is a cultural anthropologist. He is currently the chairperson of the Colombo Institute for Human Sciences and director at the Center for Poverty Analysis and at Sambapani Academic Publishers, the only academic press in Sri Lanka. As is customary, permit me to recall Dr. Pereira's academic credentials. He is a graduate of the University of Colombo and read for his PhD at the University of California in Santa Barbara in the United States of America. His postdoctoral training was at Princeton University, also in the United States. He served at the Department of Sociology of the University of Colombo for 19 years. He then went on to serve the then newly founded South Asian University in New Delhi, India, initially as its founding professor of sociology and then as chair of sociology. He also served in several administrative roles. He served twice as the dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and then as the vice president of the South Asian University. Dr. Pereira's intellectual labors focus on questions related to violence, memory, memorialization, urban life, and more broadly on culture. He has devoted much of his efforts to studying these questions in the Sri Lankan context, but not only. He has carried out fieldwork in Asia, such as in Japan, India, and Nepal, but also in Australia. His noted publications include Violence and the Burden of Memory, Remembrance and Erasure in Sinhala Consciousness, published in 2015, War Zone Tourism in Sri Lanka, Tales from Darker Places in Paradise, published in 2016, Fear of the Visual, Photography, Anthropology and the Anxieties of Seeing, published in 2020, and he has also co-authored Against the Nation, Thinking Like South Asians, published in 2019. He has also edited major volumes on a diverse range of subjects, including Humor and the Performance of Power in South Asia, published in 2022. He has won awards for his work, including the State Literary Award for the Best Translation of Poetry with Indu Gamage in 2023. Needless to say, Dr. Pereira's academic and administrative contribution has been significant. However, in my view, it is not only this contribution that makes it worthwhile for this distinguished audience to listen to him this morning, the last 15 minutes of it. Dr. Sasanka Pereira has served society meaningfully, not only through his academic and administrative work, but also as a public intellectual. Speaking at the annual research conference at the Faculty of Arts in 2014, he noted, and I quote, "Being an academic is not a matter of simply holding a job. It is a vocation, it is a way of life, it is a passion, and above all, it is a responsibility." End quote. All around me, I see academia being reduced to credentials, an insistence on exaggerated use of titles, social media posts about purported achievements and promotions, while around us, questions of the day, such as the climate change crisis, challenges to democracy, rising inequality, and the advancement of artificial intelligence press on us. In this context, Dr. Sasanka Pereira's contribution to public debate, including to debates on academic freedom, offers us a refreshing but also challenging counterexample. In 2024, he put into practice the observations he made in 2014 and opted for voluntary retirement from the South Asian universities rather than compromise on the integrity of his supervision of a postgraduate student. Dr. Sasanka Perera, therefore, stands before us not only as a serious scholar who has made a significant contribution to our understanding of the world, but also as someone who has paid a heavy price to abide by the truth-seeking responsibility that we are tasked with as academics. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Sasanka Perera. Thank you.
Good morning, friends and colleagues, and thank you, Dinesha, for that very kind introduction. Give me a second to get my papers out. I want to thank the organizers, many of whom I don't know except Latma, for inviting me to speak today at this inaugural session of this research symposium. But as it is often the case in these kinds of occasions, I am thoroughly intrigued by the limitlessness of the theme Research for Resilience, Advancing Knowledge in the Changing World. Of course, my take is going to be very different from the speakers who spoke before, as you would agree nevertheless. Anything under the sun is possible within this kind of theme. This kind of broad thematic orientation has now become the norm in our country and elsewhere too. Personally, however, I am convinced this kind of thematic broadness does not allow for the production of significant knowledge. I will leave it up to you, though, to find your way through this vastness and to make sense of it within your own disciplines, or preferably transgress pragmatically but creatively across disciplines. This is also something I think the Vice Chancellor refers to. I understand from Professors Lakmal Veeravan and Dinesha Samararatne, I am here today because of my association with social sciences. However, I have never been a discipline theoretian at any time in my career, and I have transgressed across broad disciplinary borders and specific subject domains in search of what interested me at specific times. This has taken me from sociology to history, philosophy and bodies of theory across disciplines, and at an earlier stage to genetics and neuroscience, and more recently to creative writing, including poetry and translation of literature. Obviously, much of this is beyond my formal training in social anthropology, but one can, and I believe one actually should, venture beyond the ramparts of one's training. This preface is to offer a simple explanation as a point of departure for the ideas I will be presenting, sharing today. From this eclectic and what has been for me an adventurous academic background, I want to raise very briefly two broad but fundamental questions today on the intellectual personality of both social sciences and humanities as they manifest in our society and as I understand them. These are questions I have raised both in Sri Lanka and elsewhere in South Asia for well over 2 decades. The first question: does the research we produce locally in these disciplines make an impact on the corresponding global or regional discourses? For example, does Sri Lankan sociology, political science, literature, cultural studies and so on make a difference in the ways in which these disciplines work and think elsewhere in the world? Second question: to what extent has theory and philosophy produced by our social sciences and humanities, which ideally should be so fundamental to these disciplines, impacted global discourses? Again, to simplify, have Sri Lankan social sciences and humanities taken a lead at any time in the intellectual histories of the world in theorizing these disciplines more broadly as bodies of knowledge that range from Marxism to structuralism to post-structuralism, all of which emanated from the so-called West at different historical times, which we have embraced without much reflection. While the responses to these questions ought to be clear, I am not going to answer these questions. Instead, I will place several related issues in context and let you think and make up your own minds, but hopefully founded on concrete basis as the social science tradition I come from insists. Now, I go back to question number 1. Does the research we produce locally make global or regional discursive impact? Until about the early to mid-1970s, at least where the University of Peradeniya-based social sciences were concerned, the work of scholars such as Ralph Peary, Gananath Obesekar, Leslie Gunawardene, among a few others, did write for us as well as for the world. Their work had an impact on the ways in which historical sociology was to be conducted, how Theravada Buddhism might be studied as a distinct category through its practice rather than simply via precepts, and the ways in which ethnicity and similar ethno-cultural markers could be seen or might be absent in ancient historical sources and in latter-day historiography, and how these would impact identity formations in the present. All this was local research produced by social science scholars working in our country at the time, and their work was read across the world in their own disciplines and beyond. More importantly, not only were they read, but they contributed to scholarly discourses beyond our shores. I specifically note these scholars because, initially, my own familiarity with them, with much of their work at least, occurred at a time when I was based out of the country and was reading on issues of religion and the political construction of the past that were not necessarily linked to Sri Lanka per se. Now, fast forward this to the present. Does this happen now? Today, we certainly have many more scholars in these disciplines, in universities, practitioners beyond universities, and almost limitless forums for publishing locally. Universities, faculties, and even departments run journals. But the question is, do we speak to the world convincingly through our research? Do we even speak sense to ourselves based on what we do? Why is it that we still often talk about the theoretical contributions of dead white men in these journals, and that too, centuries after their demise, and when newer ideas have emerged and overtaken theirs in the most simplistic terms, without reference to any new sources or ideas that might allow their thinking to be reinterpreted? I think the situation, this particular situation, comes about as a result of 3 inherent problems. 1, the lapses in academic networks in which we have become a part. These networks decide where we present our ideas abroad and who we invite to our deliberations here. What if these networks are spurious and mediocre? How would these interactions impact knowledge production in our own country? 2, there is no intellectually serious encouragement from universities or other entities within the country to produce core research in social sciences and humanities. I'm only talking about these disciplines, not about medicine and these kinds of things. The questionable and school-like award schemes adopted by many universities and conferences to offer recognition to so-called best papers will not pave the way for this. I never got a best paper award, by the way. It is precisely this lack that led to the brain drain of the 1960s and 1970s, which significantly impacted social sciences and humanities, a situation from which we have not recovered yet. 3, This also results from the insular and often non-reflexive and non-critical writing appearing locally, at least in the single and the Tamil languages, English languages that I can read. This is also directly linked to the space that becomes available to take our writing to the world outside. That is basically where and how we publish and how that knowledge circulates. Ask yourself if this kind of situation can allow us to be leaders in global knowledge production. Now I come to question number 2. To what extent has theory and philosophy produced by our social sciences and humanities impacted global discourses? I am personally not aware of such theoretical or philosophical contributions in recent times that have or could contribute to theory building, methodological fine-tuning, or conceptualization in these disciplines at the regional or global scale. But please feel free to correct me if I am mistaken. The reason is that we have become mere followers and imitators of borrowed bodies of theory and other forms of abstract thinking, rather than the inventors of core bodies of knowledge ourselves, based on our histories, our experiences, our research, and our thinking. We continue to be blinded by the false colonial legacy of the alleged universality of theory and philosophy. In our country and elsewhere in South Asia, it almost seems that our abstract thinking must necessarily be imported from the West for our disciplines to survive and thrive. It is in this context, but with reference to India, that Prathama Banerjee, Aditya Nigam, and Rakesh Pandey have observed, and I quote, "Theory appears as a ready-made body of philosophical thought produced in the West, while the more theory-inclined among us simply pick the latest theory off the shelf and apply it to our context, notwithstanding its provincial European origin, for we believe that theory is by definition universal." End of quote. Though on a different intellectual trajectory, this is also what Deepesh Chakrabarty attempted to argue in his 2008 book, Provincializing Europe, Post-Colonial Thought and Historical Difference. He hoped to convince his readers of the limitations of Western social science in the task of explaining the historical experiences of political modernity in South Asia. But his attempt was not to reject Western thought completely. Instead, he wanted to renew Western and particularly European thought from and for the margins. It was a matter of bringing in diverse histories from marginalized regions such as ours when it came to global knowledge production. Is it not this same blindness to limitations of theory and the absence of innovation in constructing knowledge in general, and theoretical knowledge in particular, that also prevails in social science and humanities classrooms in our universities and in related discourses beyond? That is, we are trained to be intellectually subservient in the presence of the world and inferior and be simple followers, not innovators and not inventors. So, how can any disciplinary domain thrive and produce serious knowledge for the world in such conditions? My young friend, Professor Rene Thomas, from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Bhopal, and I have attempted to address this issue in our forthcoming book to be published in December this year called Decolonial Keywords, South Asian Thoughts and Attitudes. In this book, we have provided space for 30 South Asian scholars from across disciplines in social sciences and humanities to discuss words and ideas from a variety of regional languages ranging from Sinhala to Hebrew Malayalam, encapsulating the region's languages and its vast cultural landscape, crossing national borders. Each paper reiterates specific attitudes, ways of seeing, and methods of doing that are embedded in the historical and contemporary experiences of the region, keeping in mind the context of their production and how their meanings might have changed at different historical moments. Crucially, the volume explores if these words and concepts can infuse a certain intellectual rigor into reinventing social sciences and humanities in the region and beyond. In short, we are initiating a comprehensive and culturally, linguistically, and politically inclusive effort at theory building and conceptual fine-tuning based on South Asian experiences that might be able to speak to the world in the same way schools of thought from politically dominant regions of the world have done so far to us. This is a matter of decolonizing our disciplines. When Sri Lankan social sciences and humanities unreflectively embrace what is imported in conditions of unequal power relations, it can never produce a forum or discourse from which we can speak to the world with authority. Professor Thomas and I have made an initial effort to literally and metaphorically turn the tables on theory building and conceptualization in social sciences and humanities in South Asia state. But our aim is neither to reinvent the wheel where not needed, nor to do this by succumbing to crude and parochial forms of nativism that are also politically powerful in our region. But I flag this example to show both what is possible and what is necessary if we are truly keen to infuse power into the discourses we offer. As I said at the outset, I did not answer these two questions that I posed. But when I pose these questions, I do not wish to abrogate my share of responsibility. I am sure at another time in our country's intellectual history, I would have been part of the problem too. But I continue to reflect, I think. I continue to look for ways to act and search for similarly inclined people to create a critical mass who might be able to make changes in our disciplines. The book I referred to earlier is one clear outcome of these explorations. Another is the PhD theory course I co-designed and co-taught with my colleague Professor Ravi Kumar at the South Asian University, titled Social Theory, Society and Modes of Thinking. Its sole purpose while teaching theory was to look at regional knowledge sources across history, from Jainism to Buddhism to contemporary politics, to build a body of theory and analytical categories to read our social systems. I hope the related issues I placed in context would allow you to think through these issues on your own. You may also disregard my thinking in preference to your own comfort zones. But whenever I talk about these issues, the polemical title of Kishore Mahbubani's 1998 book, Can Asians Think, come to my mind. In this context, I want to ask my friends, colleagues, and former students in Sri Lankan, now in Sri Lankan social sciences and humanities across the countries, why are we so reluctant to think? Why is it that we are not getting those 2% whatever that the medical faculty people are getting? I mean, I know that there are biases in these systems, right, that probably favor certain kinds of technical fields, but still there are other forums in which our people, I mean my tribe, should also be able to excel. Why are we so lackluster and backward in creating knowledge, not just for ourselves, but for the world as well? My fear is, if we continue along this path, we will always remain in the margin in the worlds of knowledge. Now, having said all this, I do offer my help, now that I am retired and have a little bit more time to offer. If there's any help this university or any other entity wants to help develop these disciplines, feel free to let me know. I wish you all the best in the deliberations that will follow. Thank you for your